You asked for it, so we're doing it. We're going back to Starfleet Academy to check in on the kids. Will Caleb find his mom's phone number? Will the Klingon learn new vocal inflections? Will the Combat Girl accidentally eat her tricorder? We're gonna find out. This is Starfleet Academy, midterm exam. So today, we're gonna do a midterm report card, catching us up through episode 5. Episode 1 we did in my previous video. You can check that out here if you missed it. That one gets a D. Would have been an F, except for
origami chicken.
Sadly, chicken is off the menu this time, as Nuzbraka does not appear in any of these episodes. But I hear he comes back for episode 6, so that's something to look forward to for next time. So, let's jump right into it with episode 2, Beta Test. From a Screenwriting 101 perspective, this is a better constructed episode than the premiere. One of my main complaints about that episode was that the resolution of the plot relied on technological mumbo-jumbo, rather than any inherent qualities of the characters themselves. This episode does not have that problem. The story here is very much tied up in the specific character of gritty street urchin and programmable matter enthusiast, Caleb Mir. The story kicks off with the arrival of Emran Sadal, the president of Betazed. We learn that the Betazoids withdrew from the Federation a century ago, and Starfleet Academy is hosting a diplomatic dinner to try to convince them to rejoin. But this is really the B plot. The A plot revolves around Caleb and his ambivalence about the Federation and the Academy, which he makes a great show of broadcasting at every available opportunity. He ridicules the instructors, he sabotages security systems, he complains about the food, he lounges around Nala's quarters like he owns the place, and tries to get one of his teachers fired. Throughout the episode, a number of other characters express their exasperation with this behavior. His teacher tells him that they don't offer a course in accredited sulking. The drill sergeant says he needs his ass kicked. This is all meant to set up that the only person who really understands him is the Betazed president's daughter, Tamira. But I'm with the drill sergeant on this one. Why exactly is this guy walking around acting like this is some terrible imposition that's been forced upon him? Remember how all of this is so the Tarathans don't chop off your hands? Remember that? The hologram remembers.
But Caleb, if you stayed in Taravan prison, they would have chopped your hands into little stumpy stumps.
Later on, after Caleb manages to single-handedly put the entire diplomatic mission in jeopardy, the Betazed president asks Nala exactly what this guy's deal is. As he points out, Academy admission traditionally includes a 6-week preparatory program, followed by a rigorous entrance exam and intense psychological scrutiny. And then he asks,
Was Mir exempt from these?
Funny you should mention that. That's been my question as well. And in this episode, we get an answer. It turns out that he did take the entrance exam. He took it in the back of the shuttle on the ride over to the Athena in the premiere, and he scored in the 98th percentile. This was my first clue that I had fundamentally misunderstood what this character is supposed to be. It's far worse than I thought. Because as it turns out, he's not just awesome at ass-kicking and programmable matter, he's awesome at everything. Temporal mechanics, personal fitness, Klingon social customs. He's the smartest, the toughest, the most worldly, the most knowledgeable person there ever was. He's basically Good Will Hunting, except he's insufferable Will Hunting. In the comments to my first video, there was one person who gently objected to some of my criticisms of Caleb. This is what they said. On the issue of Caleb as a teen, I can see you have zero understanding of survival in an urban environment. Caleb absolutely needs to posture if he's going to command respect in an underworld/underclass social environment. Essentially, this person's argument is that my problems with Caleb come down to elitism, that I'm unable to empathize with and see the value of people who aren't like me. What's funny about this is that when I try to analyze my own visceral hatred of this character, and I can't remember the last time I've hated a fictional character as much as I hate this guy, when I try to sum it up, the word that I keep coming back to is privilege. The posturing that takes place in an underclass environment is about projecting an implicit threat of violence because there is no outside authority that's going to protect you. But that's not what Caleb is doing. He's not projecting menace in order to ward off potential threats. He's just strolling around like a smug prick saying, "Screw your rules, man. I make my own rules." Throughout the episode, we see these little snippets of the other kids at the school and the anxiety and stress they're putting themselves under trying to live up to the expectations of the Academy. And then here's this guy, strutting around, talking about how stupid and lame it all is, acting like everyone should be grateful that he deigns to show up at all. And everybody else, the teachers, the drill sergeant, foreign heads of state, they have to put up with it because he has a personal relationship with the Chancellor, who thinks he's the specialist boy in the whole universe. And then, in this episode, He's also given his own personal manic pixie dream girl, who is also there to recognize how special and misunderstood he is. Again, it's ironic that the most frequent criticism this show gets is that it's too woke or progressive, because this character is such a male fantasy. She's beautiful and coquettish and vulnerable and sassy, and she looks at you like you're the most important person in the world. She exists only to help Caleb work through his issues and become a better version of himself. This whole episode, and to some degree the entire series, is dependent on us seeing Caleb as an underdog in order for the story to work. And while on paper they've created a character whose backstory should cause us to root for him, all we ever see is a guy who seems to have every card in the deck stacked in his favor, and yet still acts as if he's been terribly aggrieved and mistreated. When I said earlier that this episode meets all the criteria of Screenwriting 101, that's not entirely a compliment. It hits all the beats it's supposed to. The problem is introduced at around minute 15, it escalates around minute 30, by minute 45 all seems lost, and then in the last 10 minutes the problem is resolved. But the trick with screenwriting is to make those story beats invisible, to make it feel like the story progresses organically in a way that, in retrospect, seems inevitable, given the characters who are driving it. When you fail to pull off that trick, what you get is a story that feels like it's been twisted and contorted in order to make sure that our heroes come out on top. And that's what happens here. The conceit of this episode is that President Sadal was never really there to negotiate. His mind was made up long before he set foot on the campus, and he seizes on the first available pretext to shut the whole thing down. But Caleb saves the day by mentioning physics to Nala and convincing Tamira to ask her father to come back to the table one more time. Her father agrees, and Nala is able to secure the Betazoid's re-entry into the Federation by promising to move the Federation's seat of government to Betazed. But is this really what we're supposed to understand has happened here? That, but for Caleb making a personal plea to Tamira and giving Nala an inspiration, none of this would have come about? Because this is not some small concession that's being made here. This is a fundamental decision about the structure of the entire Federation government for generations to come. I would hope that this is not the sort of thing that gets decided by a couple of university administrators and a single admiral based on the advice of some college kids. This is the sort of thing that would be debated and coordinated at the very highest levels of government, not improvised at the last minute to salvage a negotiation. But the show needs that to be what happened because it needs Caleb to be instrumental in the resolution of the plot. Because he's the hero of the story, and we need to see that even though he spent the entire episode acting like a self-absorbed prick, only a self-absorbed prick like him could have found this solution. And rather than scale the problem down to something that could plausibly be affected by the actions of a single first-year cadet, the story asks us to accept that he's at the center of a galaxy-altering decision. How well that works for you is going to depend on how far you're willing to suspend your disbelief. For me, it doesn't work at all, but still. Even if this episode strains credibility past the breaking point, all the story beats are there, which I feel like merits a passing grade. And the sign language translator that the Bajoran president uses is really cool. So I'm going to give this one a C-. Another friendly commenter on my last video suggested that it was unfair to judge this series based on a single episode or even a single season, since after all, The Next Generation famously took a couple of years to find its footing. This is a good point. A lot of shows take a while to really start clicking. And the first season of Next Generation really was pretty abysmal. I was a kid when it came out, but even then, I remember watching a lot of those episodes and thinking, yeah, this is not great. Two things I would say to that. One, the pilot episode for Next Generation was actually pretty solid. It had its problems, but it was one of the strongest episodes of that first season. But more importantly, The Next Generation was shaped like a show I would like. As bad as a lot of the stories were, and some of them were very bad, and as weakly drawn as some of the characters started off, it was still a show about spacefaring adventurers exploring the galaxy. However you may feel about Starfleet Academy, I think we can all agree that it's doing something other than that. So what is it doing? There's a couple of kind of meta moments in episode 2 where the show seems to be directly addressing this question. Early on, as they're strategizing how to approach the Betazed delegation, Admiral Vance says, "We need to show that we value a young demographic." And then later, Caleb throws a piece of fruit in the trash and it plays a little ringtone version of the 1960s Star Trek theme. And that seems to be the idea behind this show. Let's try to appeal to a younger audience while decorating it with a kind of Star Trek wallpaper. So it's constantly throwing out little references to remind you that this is supposed to be Star Trek. It's the Kirk Pavilion, it's the Boothby Memorial. But fundamentally, it's a teen melodrama. The main story in each of these 4 episodes is about the kids, how they're doing emotionally, what's the state of their relationships. When there's a larger story happening around them, it's there to support their story. It's not the focus. So if the question we're trying to answer is this Star Trek in any traditionally recognizable form? We can answer that right now. It's not, and it's not trying to be. So I don't know what to do other than to try to evaluate it on its own terms. With that in mind, let's move on to episode 3. There's not really an A and B plot to this one. It's entirely about the kids and their rivalry with the students from the War College. More specifically, it focuses on the competition between a pair of characters who we met in the premiere. I made a whole thing last time of not learning their names, but that's going to get tedious. So let's introduce ourselves. This is Darum Ramey, scion of a wealthy Kionian family who's also secretly some kind of fish creature. This, apparently, is Genesis Life, daughter of a prominent Starfleet admiral. I have to say, as much as I'm not a big fan of these performances either, these two are a breath of fresh air after spending an entire episode focused on Caleb. They may be annoying, but at least their problems stem from their need to be the best at everything they do, rather than constantly whining about how unfair it is that they have to be there. And this is the source of the conflict between these two characters. They're both highly driven, type A personalities who see second place as first loser, and they're well matched enough that it's a real question who's going to come out on top. The resolution to this is a little heavy on the melodrama, but overall, it's not a bad storyline. This episode really leans into the idea that this is supposed to be the hip, modern Star Trek, although at times it's trying so hard that it feels a bit like that Steve Buscemi meme from 30 Rock. It's reminiscent of the J.J. Abrams Star Trek movies. The soundtrack is a lot of techno music and soft hip-hop, and they don't miss an opportunity to show the beautiful young people in their underwear. But mostly, the tone is comedic, which is a better fit for these characters than the galaxy-altering stakes we had in the last episode. The bulk of the story revolves around a game called Calica, which is a kind of futuristic capture the flag. The way they portray this game is a little weird. As one of the characters says, this is basically laser tag. Yes, there are explosions going off and simulated phaser bolts flying around, and there's a pretty demanding obstacle course to traverse, but there's no actual danger to it. So while I can understand some of the Starfleet kids being intimidated and not very good at it, the abject terror with which some of them react to it seems a little over the top. The War College kids think so too, and they do a nice job of humiliating our heroes by playing a highlight reel of their most pathetic moments out in the main quad. We later find out that they did this with the help of War College Chancellor Krellick, which broadens the conflict between the two schools to include their leaders as well. This is meant to contrast their conflicting philosophies. Kelrick thinks the kids need to learn that conflict can come at any time, and life isn't always fair. Nala says that what they need is empathy, to be given some reason to believe in someone. And once again, I'm unclear on where this class of Starfleet cadets is supposed to be drawn from. Nala keeps talking about them like they're all like Caleb. They grew up in the back of cargo ships, and they've been neglected and deprived their whole lives. But this is very weird because, up to now, the two other students' backstories that we know best are Genesis, who's an admiral's daughter, and Darum, who comes from a wealthy family. There's also Tamira's brother, Occam, whose father is the president of Beta Z. We later learned that the hologram was specially created to serve as an ambassador for her entire civilization. The Klingon is another story, which we'll get to next. But based on what we're actually shown, it's hard to see why most of these students should get the kid glove treatment. If anything, it seems like a lot of them could use a sharp slap in the face from reality. Speaking of which, this episode benefits immensely from the fact that, for a lot of it, Caleb remains on the sidelines, only popping up from time to time to beat everyone at rope climbing or correct Nala on Starfleet regulations. Because guys, he's so good at things. He's so good. There's not a whole lot more to say about this episode. Darum learns that there's more to leadership than mouthing empty slogans, and the kids learn to work together as a team to outwit the War College. The third act revolves around an Ocean's 11-style heist in the War College dorm, which is the sort of thing that we've seen a million times before, but honestly, it's pretty fun. A lot of the episode is like that. It's gags that you've seen in a bunch of other movies, but they're executed well enough that they're still effective. To the degree that this show works at all, it works best when it's like this. Light and silly, and with very low real-world stakes. Strategizing a prank war against a rival school feels like about the right level of problem for these characters to deal with. And when they ultimately triumph, it feels earned instead of being engineered by the writing staff. So you know, for a show that I don't much like, and that I wouldn't still be watching if it weren't for this channel, I didn't hate this episode. Parts of it are actually pretty funny, and the photography is more adventurous than you typically see in a Star Trek show. It's a move in the direction of what the best version of a show like this could be. So, I'm giving it a B. On to episode 4. This episode revolves around Klingon cadet Jaden, another performance that I'm not a big fan of. As I said in my previous video, most modern Klingons are really only allowed 3 modes of expression: monotone and stoic, monotone and angry, and monotone and jolly. I really miss guys like this.
And now to show that my intentions are sincere, I shall kill one of the prisoners.
That guy seems like he's having a blast. And actually, in this episode, this guy is too. Jaden, however, is not. And things get even worse when he learns that his family was aboard a ship that's been reported lost, with the passengers feared dead. What Starfleet Academy does with the Klingons is interesting. In this episode, we learn that the Klingon homeworld of Kronos was destroyed in the aftermath of the burn, and the survivors have been reduced to roaming the galaxy as refugees, with their numbers rapidly dwindling towards extinction. What the show does with Jaden is fairly interesting as well. Much of this episode is given over to flashbacks of him and his family. They're living in the woods on Krios Prime, apparently living off the land. Jaden's father is a Klingon traditionalist who expects his sons to follow in his footsteps. Jaden's brother fits that mold, but he doesn't. He doesn't connect with the warrior ethos. He's drawn to exploration and healing, and he becomes intrigued by a Starfleet transmitter that his brother brings to him. After his brother dies, he's expected to step up and complete the family's rite of passage. But he's unable to do it, and they leave him behind when they depart the planet. So, this is a different take on a Klingon than we've seen before. He's insecure, he gets panic attacks, he feels alienated from his own culture. It's a pretty compelling character to work with. But this is where the actor is really hamstrung by the constraints of the Klingon vocal style. It's just very hard to bring any nuance or life to a performance when you must deliver every line like this. He does okay with it, but it really gets grating after a while. The flashbacks are set in contrast to what's happening in the present day. It's become clear to me at this point that there is a direct inverse relationship between how watchable an episode is and how central Caleb is to the story. He's not the focus of this one, but he keeps inserting himself into it. The framing device of this episode revolves around a debate competition, and wouldn't you know it, Caleb is also the best at debating. It's amazing what you pick up living on the streets. Formal debate tactics, Federation case law, Starfleet regulations. He offers to help Jaden in the debate, but Jaden takes it as an insult. So a big chunk of the runtime is given over to the conflict between the two of them. The one saving grace of this plotline is that they're really warming me up to the character of Darren by giving him lines like this.
Pretend you're punching Caleb in the face. We all want to punch Caleb in the face.
But the choice of framing this episode around a debate tournament is an awkward one. It's meant to show that Jaden is able to come into his own as a member of Starfleet in a way that he never could have if he'd stayed with his family. But why a debate contest specifically? After losing his temper and being expelled from the debate, drill instructor Laura Thawk stops by to offer her guidance as his Klingon elder. She tells him that he needs to see himself as his brother and his father saw him, as a warrior not with weapons, but with words. Really? Is that what we're supposed to take from these flashbacks? I get that he doesn't relate to the warrior ethos and his natural talents lie along a different path, but I don't see any signs that oratory is the way he's meant to go. Maybe horticulture or something, I don't know. It's just a very odd choice. The resolution to this episode is actually pretty clever. The Federation has offered the Klingons a new homeworld that some of them have already started informally settling on, but they see this as charity, and to accept it would be a grave humiliation. Jaden tells Nala and the assembled cadets that if they want the Klingons to listen, they need to speak to them in their own language. So Nala takes a fleet out to the planet to tell the Klingons that they're trespassing on Federation territory and will be repelled by force if necessary. This reframes the situation for the Klingons as an act of conquest, and after a perfunctory battle, Starfleet withdraws so they can claim their prize. This is a good Star Trek-y solution to a problem. It's the kind of thing that Picard might have come up with. Although the Klingons do have a lot more warships than I was expecting, given the descriptions we're given of just how decimated they're supposed to be. But again, we have here this situation where, like in Episode 2, huge galaxy-shaping decisions are seemingly being made based on the recommendations of college students. And the problem with this is not just that it's not very believable. It's also wasting a dramatic opportunity that could add some weight to the story they're trying to tell. The thing about being young is that, for the most part, you're not able to affect any of the big, important decisions being made by people in power. Even if you really do have better ideas, you have no ability to put them into action, because you've not yet reached the position of authority that allows you to make those decisions. And this is such a rich vein of drama that the show could be mining. This idea of the younger generation watching in frustration as the older generation makes what seems to them to be obvious mistakes. This is where idealistic ambition and drive come from, this belief that you could make things better if only anyone would listen to you. And to some degree, This seems to be a story that this show wants to tell, but it also wants its characters to win. So it keeps contorting reality to make sure that they always end up on top. But of course, who really cares about the fate of a proud ancient civilization on the brink of extinction when we've got Caleb's feelings to worry about? The episode wraps up with Jaden and Caleb making amends, which is fine, as long as you don't go over the top with it.
My brother, Dar, you two are alike. I did not think both of you could live in...
Oh, for fuck's sake. I didn't even know Jaden's brother, but I can tell you that this is an insult to that man's memory. He seemed like a pretty decent guy. Comparing him to this guy brings dishonor to your entire family line. Now you're gonna have to go shoot another bird or something. Anyway, there's a lot of good stuff in this episode, but it's wrapped up in some of this show's worst tendencies. I certainly didn't enjoy it as much as the last one. So this one gets a C+. Next up, episode 5. One thing that I'll say for this episode is that it kind of breezes by in a way that the others don't. It's got a structure, but it's a loose one, and it's not obvious what the resolution of the story is going to be. This gives it a bit of unpredictability, though I'm torn on how much of that is intentional and how much of it is just a lack of focus. This episode centers on Sam, the show's holographic life form. As it turns out, she comes from a whole planet of holograms, who were created centuries ago by what they call organics, but at some point achieved independence from them. She's been sent to observe and explain organic behavior so the planet's rulers can determine if it's safe to resume contact with them. More specifically, her job title is Emissary, which this episode uses as a rather thin hook to set up its main story, which is Sam's growing obsession with the long-lost Benjamin Sisko. And this is where I really have to ask who this show is supposed to be for. Star Trek already has a narrower fan base than something like Star Wars, and Deep Space Nine is sort of the lesser-known cult classic within that base. Now don't get me wrong, I'm thrilled to spend the bulk of this episode contemplating what happened to Sisko and getting little tidbits about how the Bajoran religion evolved in the centuries following his ascension. But I'm the type of person that this show is least designed to appeal to. The type of person it does seem designed for, which is someone who's in it for the interpersonal teen drama first and the Star Trek trappings second, seems like the type of person who'd be least invested in exploring this relatively obscure corner of the Star Trek lore. So while I'm happy to spend this time meditating on a show that I like much more than this one, I'm not sure what it has to do with this show. But as I say, this is a very loosely structured episode, so we take a number of detours along the way. The visual language of the episode morphs to match Sam's hyperactive personality, with infographics and other effects conveying her point of view. This can sometimes make it a little difficult to tell if what we're seeing is supposed to be taken literally. I mean, do Darum's people actually vomit glitter? I hope not, but it's hard to say. For a while, the show turns into basically a hangout episode, as we follow the kids to a bar where they run into their rivals from the War College and Sam somehow gets raging drunk. And surprisingly, I found this fairly enjoyable. At this point, I don't loathe these kids anymore. It's like real life. After a while, you get used to people and there's a certain comfort in that familiarity. God help me, they even managed to make Caleb tolerable in this one because they finally show him screwing up at something. So fine, you can go make out with your super hot girlfriend, I don't care. This, again, is probably the best version of what this show could be. I'm not particularly invested in the interpersonal drama between these characters, but the show is, and they might as well lean into it and let them have these little lightweight teen adventures instead of trying to thrust them into the middle of galaxy-shaking events. There's another story running alongside all this in which Nala attempts to coach Chancellor Kelrick through a ritual dinner that he's scheduled to present to an important guest. The character of Kelrick feels like another missed opportunity for this show. They've made him very weak, and by that I don't mean physically weak, I mean weak as a character. He's fussy and awkward and prissy and pretty ineffectual. We never see any sign that he's a good chancellor or even that he has any particularly good ideas. He seems to exist only to be proven wrong by Nala, which I guess is supposed to make her philosophy on life look stronger in comparison. But when her opponent's worldview is so easily discredited, it doesn't really prove much. This got me thinking about Chain of Command from Star Trek The Next Generation. This is a two-part episode in which Picard is sent on a clandestine mission with a high probability of failure, and command of the Enterprise passes to Starfleet Captain Edward Jellico. Jellico comes in and immediately starts ruffling Riker's feathers. He wants to change the command structure and the duty schedule. He has a leadership style that's heavy on discipline but light on the human touch. Naturally, because we've been watching Riker for 5 seasons at this point, we're on his side, outraged at this clearly inferior officer being put in Picard's place. But over the course of the two-parter, we come to realize that Jellico is in fact a highly competent commander. He's different than Picard, but he's more than able to step up in a crisis. He may even be better suited to the particular situation that they find themselves in than Picard would have been. And in the course of this, Riker is forced to recognize that his way of doing things is not the only way of doing them, and that while a different approach may not necessarily be superior, it is at least valid. And I wish this show would give Nala a foil who could do that for her. If she had to defend her worldview against an opposing one that wasn't just a straw man, it would make for more compelling drama, and it would make her ultimate victory feel much more earned. It would give us a sense that her idealism really does have to fight to stay alive in this fallen era that we found ourselves in. Because this episode has such a loose structure, it needs to have some sort of through line that provides it with some stakes. Throughout the episode, Sam is repeatedly brought before her superiors, who demand to know why she hasn't made more progress on her mission. By the middle of the story, she's told that she has 1 week to completely understand organic behavior or she'll be recalled to her homeworld, never to leave again. This is what prompts her alcoholic jag with the other students. Because of course, the task she's been set is impossible. At the episode's end, she's summoned in front of them once again and has no choice but to report her failure. And then she just tells them she's not going to leave. So I guess the situation wasn't so dire as we'd been led to believe. It's a bit of a cheat. As a tribute to Deep Space Nine, this episode does a great job. Sisko's ultimate fate remains a mystery, and we get some nice closure with his son, Jake. At the end of the episode, we find out that the teacher who's been guiding Sam through this exploration is in fact the latest host of the Dax symbiont. So this is all great. But again, what does that mean to anyone who isn't already invested in Deep Space Nine? Why are we spending so much time talking about it on this show? Is this going to be something that continues to inform the series going forward? Or was it just a one-time gimmick to lure in skeptical fans? I honestly don't know how to evaluate this episode. I basically enjoyed it, but it was also kind of a mess. So I'm moving to a pass-fail evaluation for this one. And I'm giving it a pass. And that'll be a wrap on the midterms. So, my first video took off beyond my wildest expectations, and then my second one sank like a rock. Apparently, the algorithm is mad at me, but you can help. Like, comment, subscribe. There's apparently something called hype points. Throw me some of those. What are you saving them for? But many thanks to all of you for watching. I'll see you back here real soon.